It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
So, Kylie, can you feel what I can feel?
I don't think I can feel anything. What can you feel?
Love.
Love.
Love is in the air. Love is in the air, Kylie. Can you feel it? Valentine's Day. Oh, come on. What if I was to... No, I haven't got anything organised. Never mind. No, I'm sorry. Oh, dear. Not off to a great start, are we? Well, you told me not to organise anything because tonight
lucky I wasn't expecting anything anyway.
We're looking after our granddaughter tonight so that our daughter and her husband can celebrate a Valentine's, their first Valentine's as parents.
It's pretty exciting.
It is pretty exciting. This is what 26 years of marriage sounds and looks like, folks. Valentine's, yeah, no, we've got it covered.
We get to celebrate with the grandbaby.
Hey, today on the Happy Families podcast, Kylie and I thought that what we might do is something completely different. If you've been along for the ride for a while now, we've never actually shared the story of how our marriage began, how our relationship kicked off. Where did it all start? Why are we happily married after 26 years? In today's podcast, we're going to share the story of, number one, how we met. Number two, how we dated and got engaged after only knowing each other for a couple of months and dating for 2 weeks. Number three, how I won our honeymoon to Fiji. 8 nights, including helicopter transfers. Amazing. And number four, 3 things that support the happiest of marriages. Because it's 26 years for us next month. And I don't know about you, being crazy about me, but I am crazy about you. Just crazy about you.
Stop it.
All right, so let's kick off with number one. How did we meet and
How long is this podcast going to go for?
Well, we've got to get it done in like 12 minutes. So I'm going to do my best to not talk because if I talk I'm the details person when it comes to this story. I will talk for like 2 hours.
Except you get all the details wrong every time.
So what we want you to do as you're listening to this conversation is imagine that you're sitting in our lounge room. You've got a nice glass of sparkling water with some ice and lemon slices or lime. And just join us for the conversation as we share with you how it all happened for Justin and Kylie, well before Happy Families was even...
Dreamed of.
Yeah, even before it was ever in our imaginations. Where did it all start?
Well, we were at a young single adult convention on the Sunshine Coast.
Yandina, we called it Camp Krusty. That's not what it was really called, but that's what we called it back in the late 1990s.
Accommodation was pretty poor back then. I think I was in a marquee tent with bunk stretchers.
Yeah, and I was in a room with about 15 other guys with smelly feet and sleeping bags. So it was Christmas, New Year's, 1996, 4 or 5 day convention across that period. I arrived early, and since no one was really doing anything and I wanted the party to start, I started introducing myself as Justin Coulson, the president of the Good Time Committee. Now, there wasn't a Good Time Committee except that I just invented it. But I kept on saying, if you're not having a good time, just come and find me, okay? I'll make sure that you're having a good time. What I was really doing was trying to introduce myself to as many girls as possible, and I think it worked.
Well, I was a pretty timid. I had just turned 18.
And I was 21.
And I had never attended anything like this.
Yeah, nor did I.
Most people were 20 plus years of age. And so I felt very much out of my depths. I had a boyfriend, and he may have broken up with me in the lead up to attending this because it kind of was a bit of a done thing back then.
You just want to see who else might be there.
Make sure you've got all your options open.
Right.
And I was so inexperienced, I didn't know anything about that at that point. So I went unattached, and I may have seen this really good-looking guy.
Are you talking about me?
No, of course not. No. Walking around and making his way through all the groups, and I could just feel the energy and the excitement, and I really wanted to know what was going on. So I actually asked a couple of girls that I knew if they knew who you were, and they said no. And about 15, 20 minutes later, I'd gone off and met some other people, and I turned around and those girls were talking to you, and I knew based on how they were responding to you, that they actually knew you and you knew them. I was really ticked off. Right. So I walked over to the group. I can
feel the competition already. Wow.
I walked over to the group and I literally kind of just pushed my way into the circle until you noticed me. And you may have introduced me like you introduced everybody else and said, hi, my name's Justin. I'm the president of the Good Time Committee.
Doesn't exist, but here I am.
And you shook my hand and I said, I'm Kylie, and my job was done. I just needed you to know my name.
So fast forward a couple of days and we bumped into each other again. I really have no recollection of this, but I've heard you share the story several times. I feel uncomfortable with this part of the story and I really don't recall it. So I'm going to have to get you to share this as well.
So it's service day. We're all engaged in different service activities around the camp to beautify the camp that really was very run down. And I had picked to paint the roof. My job was done. And I came back to the main eating area, dining area, and there was a big kind of outdoor space. And there was a whole heap of girls sitting in this semicircle, and they weren't really talking. And we didn't have mobile phones back then. So they were kind of just in the area. And I kind of...
Imagine that, a bunch of teenage girls or early 20s girls and none of them looking at a phone because they didn't exist. They were just sitting there.
And I said to them, what are you guys doing? And they went, oh, nothing. And I just kind of noticed their gaze was all headed in one direction. There was a window in front of them. And behind that window was a young man who was painting, I think, Fred Flintstone from memory on the window.
I was painting Fred Flintstone. and I am embarrassed by this story, but I kind of love it as well. So keep on going.
And I just looked at this group of girls and I was like, this is crazy. Why is everyone just sitting here? So I decided that I wasn't going to sit there and be a part of 15 girls, that I would be part of one. So I walked inside and I sat down next to you and I started up a conversation.
Very bold, Mrs. Happy Families.
Well, yeah, got me somewhere.
Right. So we chatted. Apparently, I have no recollection of...
It was completely memorable, clearly.
Yeah, I have no recollection of meeting you there. I have no idea that there was a group of girls watching me paint this.
You were
Fred
concentrating.
Flintstone. I'm a terrible
very
artist.
Heavily.
I have no idea how to paint. All right, so let's move this right along. I'm in a dorm with the guy that you'd been dating, Joel. We're having a conversation about all the hot girls that are at convention, and I made the comment, my goal was to ask as many girls out on dates as I possibly could. A few of the guys nodded approvingly and said, yeah, that's what we're all here to do. We're going to ask all these girls on dates. And one person said, yeah, but you don't know if they've got boyfriends. And I said, well, if they've got boyfriends, they can say no. I feel terrible. I can't actually believe that I'm sharing this on the podcast, but I've started now. I said they're fair game unless there's a ring on the finger. My 21-year-old said it with a lot more conviction than I'm saying it right now. I feel uncomfortable saying it.
I still believe that.
Well, I kind of do too, but I wish that I'd said it more sensitively.
I don't.
It's not a very nice way to say it. But what I was basically saying was, if there's a ring on somebody's finger, then they are clearly in a committed relationship. They're getting engaged. They're getting married. Stay away. But if there's no ring on their finger, we're here at a young adult convention where we're supposed to be meeting people. So ask them on a date. If they're serious about someone else, they'll say, I'm sorry, I've got a boyfriend. And if they're not, then they'll say no. The only person who really got upset about me saying that was the guy that had been dating you, Joel. He got most upset, pushed hard against that. And that's kind of all I recall there. But a couple of days later, you and I were doing the cleanup at the end of camp, and somehow after everything was cleaned up, you and I ended up...
we kind of just bumped into each other. I had managed to separate myself from Joel somehow. It just kind of happened as we were moving around, and you and I bumped into each other. We started a conversation and we ended up near the pool. I had tried,
yes, we
for
did.
the very first time, I had tried cable skiing,
Right.
water skiing,
Okay.
the day before. I am terrible at any of those kinds of sports, and I don't even think I made it around the track.
And your shoulders were so sore.
And my shoulders were sore, and I mentioned that to you, and you thought, well, I could give you a massage.
Yeah.
I will say
There was
that's the
nothing to it.
only time I've ever had a massage from you, ever.
Right.
But
there was nothing in it. But
There was nothing in
while
it.
I was massaging your sore shoulders from the cable skiing the day before, guess who walked over? The ex-boyfriend. Yeah.
he wasn't the ex-boyfriend by that stage, though.
Right. So he was pretty upset about things, but I was oblivious to it all, and I just left you guys to chat because it was pretty clear to me that he wasn't going to leave. A couple of days later, I bumped into him at an after party, and I said to him...
And we'd broken up by that point.
Yeah, probably because I was massaging your sore shoulders. And I actually remember saying to him, mate, look, I know you're upset about me spending time with Kylie the other day, but if you and her are supposed to be together, there's nothing I can do that's going to change that. And if I'm supposed to be with her, then there's nothing you can do that's going to change that. It was such a confident thing that I said to him.
But what's so funny about that is you weren't even interested in me.
No, not really.
There wasn't any romantic notion between either of us. I
just
thought you were good looking.
And I thought you were great.
But there wasn't anything further from that.
So let's fast forward just another couple of weeks. You're going on your first family holiday ever, and it just happens to be to the New South Wales Central Coast, half an hour from where I live.
In the lead up to us leaving on this trip, I had gotten back with Joel, and I had
talk about on again, off again.
It was pretty messy, and I had mentioned to him that the plan was when I went to Gosford that I would actually touch base with you because you were the only person's phone number I had, so that I could spend some time with some of the young single adults that I had met during that time. And he was pretty obviously adamant that I wasn't going to do that. But as we got closer to the departure date, he said, I've been thinking about this whole thing with Justin, and I actually think that you should go out on a date with him. And I said, look, we're back together now. I said, there's no worry. Like, I'm not worried about it. And he said, no. I really think you should go out with Justin. One date will cure you, and you'll
see what a loser he is.
You'll absolutely be convinced that he's not the person for you. So we came down to Gosford. I did not contact you. I was there for 2 weeks, and it was 2 days before, and Joel and I actually ended up having a bit of an argument.
Because you hadn't gone on a date with me.
And I was pretty upset with the way he treated me. And so I thought, you know what? I'm here. I've only got 2 more days. I'll just give Justin a call and see if he wants to catch up, which you did.
And we had such a great date.
And we did have so much fun.
Yeah. So we went out on that Sunday night. I introduced you to my family on our first date.
You did.
And
I thought your mum hated me.
And my mum had actually said, she's the one. And I dropped you home at midnight because that was your curfew. And we sat on the front step until 1 a.m. I got home at about 2 a.m. The next morning I was on your doorstep at 7:30 for date number 2. Just loved it. Had such a great time.
You were supposed to start work at 3 o'clock, I think.
Yeah, I just didn't bother going to work. Like, I was completely besotted with this wonderful, wonderful girl that I was now dating. But then you went home and I started dating this other girl, and I don't know, stuff happened. And then, what was it, April, you came back down to Sydney, this time for another convention.
We stayed in touch over the phone.
We talked a bit, yeah.
A bit?
Well, we talked a lot. But then we spent a lot of time together at this convention, and by the end of the convention, we'd had our first kiss, and we were pretty serious about each other in the space of just a couple of days. You went home. I talked to you every day, and about a week later, 1 week later, I rang you. We stayed on the phone until about 2 a.m.
Well, I think what was really cool about this part of the story is that you had caught up with some friends you hadn't seen for a couple of years, and you'd been with them for a couple of hours. And they finally stopped you mid-sentence and said, do you realise that the whole time you've been talking, you haven't stopped talking about this girl?
Yeah, all you want to talk about is Kylie. And I realised they were right. So I rang you from a payphone, because there were no mobile phones back then, and said, I'm driving from Sydney back to Gosford. Will you be awake at 10 o'clock when I get home? And you said, okay. And I rang you at 10 when I got home. I sped home. We talked till 2, and at 2 o'clock in the morning, I asked you to marry me over the phone. Like, how romantic. If I could go back, I would do that again. Well, sorry, I wouldn't do that again. I would do that very differently, so differently. But you said yes, amazingly. So here's the thing. At this point, we've probably spent 4 or 5, maybe 6 days, probably 6 days, if that, in one another's physical presence. Then I got a job in Mount Isa. You were in Brisbane finishing your studies. Your parents wouldn't let us get married until you were 19. That pushed it back, and in the end, it sort of kept on getting pushed back. We were engaged for 11 months. I'd only seen you for 4 days during that 11 months. The rest of it was over the phone and old-fashioned letters. Email was a brand new thing. That's how old we are. And in fact, I worked this out. After our honeymoon, we had spent more time in one another's physical presence from marriage to the end of our honeymoon than we'd spent in our entire lives up to our marriage. Oh, and I should also mention, I did say I won our honeymoon. 8 nights, Tokariki Island in the Mamanuca group of islands in Fiji, including helicopter transfers. I didn't have to pay for it. We're kind of running out of time. Have we got time for the story about how I won it?
Oh, you have to tell a story.
Okay, in 30 seconds or less. You were talking to me on the telephone about how you'd been looking at some bridal magazines to get some ideas for the wedding. I complained to you that since I was only earning about $18,000 a year as a radio announcer at Hot FM and 4LM in Mount Isa, we couldn't afford those bridal magazines because they were about $20 each. You were really sad. I was really sad that I'd said that to you. Felt awful. Went into the local news agency and bought 2 of them and went to post them, and then discovered that it was going to cost me a fortune to post these things.
I can't believe you didn't realise that.
After I'd spent all this money going on the magazines. So embarrassingly.
So then you decided that you would rip out all the pages of the dresses you liked. I so wish that I had kept them.
That was so bad, apparently.
I threw them in the bin. They were that bad. I wish I had kept them.
And I just said, I bought these magazines for you, but they were too expensive to post. So here are the pictures that I think you might like because I like them. But in one of those magazines, there was a win a Fijian holiday for you and your groom or bride. You've just got to tell us in 50 words or less why you should win this trip to Tokariki Island. So I wrote a poem and I won the honeymoon.
And up until this point, I had never stayed in anything more than a roadside motel.
Not just that, but our honeymoon, we had no budget for it. And so we were going to be staying in roadside motels as we drove up the coast to our new home in Rockhampton, which is where we were going to be living. So I wrote this poem and it won. I still know the poem. I'll share it with you in just a sec. But let's wrap up this podcast by highlighting that, number one, we got married after we'd known each other for 4 months and dated for 2 weeks. Number two, I had a radio career. Then our marriage survived not just radio, which is a feat in and of itself, but returned to school for 8.5 years full time. And our marriage survived me being a student, living on a student income and raising 2 kids and then 3 kids and then 4 kids and then 5 kids. Graduated with my PhD. We had our 6th daughter shortly after I started the business. The marriage has survived starting and running a business. Now we've got 6 kids and a grandkid. We're up to 26 years of marriage next year. And our marriage is the best thing in our lives. Without question, the best thing in our lives. So we want to share with you 3 things that our experience and research show make for a happy marriage. If they're not relevant to you, that's okay. We just want to share them because they're relevant to us and they fit with what the research shows.
So number one, we just might really like each other.
We really like each other a lot.
One of the things that I love about our story is on the morning we got married,
yes,
you were driving down the freeway to meet me.
Can I share this one? Because this one,
Sure.
I had this great experience driving from Gosford down to Sydney for the wedding. I'm sitting with my best man in the car, just the 2 of us driving down. And as we went over the Hawkesbury River Bridge and I'm looking at the water, my friend Ian said to me, "Are you nervous?" And I looked at him and said, "I feel like today I'm going to make a commitment to spend the rest of my life with my very best friend." I was so excited. Like there were no nerves at all. I just couldn't wait. I don't think that I realized the enormity of what we were committing to in some ways because I was just so young and dumb. But I was genuinely and truly excited to be able to spend that time with you.
And I felt exactly the same. I didn't have that conversation, but I was just so excited to be able to say yes and to spend the rest of my life with you.
The very, very famous philosopher Alain de Botton talks about how one reason that marriages fail so much is because of the growing resentment as couples grow together and discover that they can't do a lot of the things that they once did or what they want to do because of one another. And I just find that such a pessimistic view of what a relationship is. You and I drive each other mad in a variety of different ways. There's no doubt about that. And we've each brought a whole lot of baggage into our relationship. But I decided when I made that commitment to marry you, when I asked you to marry me at 2 o'clock on the phone that morning, that I was going to love you more deeply than anyone or anything in my life. And that has been one of the most wonderful decisions that I've ever made. So how's that for a happy Valentine's message? Let's move on to the second one.
Number 2.
Okay, the second thing, this is going to be a little bit of a surprising one and maybe even a little bit provocative for some people. But attending church together has been something that has been a real stabilizing force for us in our marriage. Brad Wilcox is a UVA, University of Virginia professor, sociology professor. And he's just written a book called Get Married. I'm actually going to have him on the podcast in a few weeks to talk about the book and the research behind it. But basically his research shows that couples who have their faith in common and who participate in their religious worship together tend to have higher levels of marital and life satisfaction than those who don't. Now, of course, there's plenty of people who don't have faith who live wonderfully happy lives and are delightedly happy in their marriages. But on average, that's what the difference is that exists. And of course, there's plenty of churchgoers that are miserable. This is not causal, this is correlational. But for us, what has happened is our core beliefs are common. We've got our values, we know what they are, we stick to them, and we spend a lot of time in a community that shares those values, and that reinforces the value of our marriage. So that would be what I would say our second one is. Number one, we just really, really like each other so very much. And number two, we have those core values in common and we actively practice them.
And I think as we have gone through different challenges throughout our lives, and some of those have like rocked the very foundation of everything we believe in, it has been the commonality that we share in those core values that has enabled us to look towards each other instead of turning away. And that's made all the difference.
So that leads into the third big idea that has, I think, helped us to have a 26-year marriage that just flourishes, that just thrives and brings me to tears when I think about how grateful I am for it. Early in our first year of marriage, I think we were about 9 months in when we had our first fight, first argument. And I remember at some point in that early stage, during one of our conflicts, you said, "Oh, look, if we're just going to be like this, we might as well get divorced," or something like that. You dropped the D word. And I remember so distinctly, I remember stopping you and saying, no matter what happens in this marriage, we don't say divorce. It's not in our vocabulary. Now, with time, I think that I was probably a little bit too strong on that. If there is a relationship where there is abuse happening, where somebody is not safe, divorce has to be an option. There are some marriages that really shouldn't continue, but fortunately ours is not one of those. And since that day, you've never said the word divorce. It's never come up in our conversation. It just hasn't been an option. And I think having that level of commitment, we've burnt the boats. There's no going back. This is what decision we've made. That's been so fundamental to the level of commitment that we have in our marriage. When I look at the very best marriage research, it shows clearly that the number one predictor of relationships that work is literally commitment, when both couples are fully committed.
Well, we've probably bored everyone to tears with our stories.
It's a great story. Come on. I'm so
but
sorry.
Hopefully some of our tips may be helpful. But you did tease everyone. You won a honeymoon.
Yes.
With a poem.
Oh, yeah, I did say I'd share the poem. Okay, here we go. I don't even have it in front of me. I've memorized it because...
You have, all these years.
Here's how it goes. My love for Kylie makes me swoon. I'd love to surprise her with the ultimate honeymoon. We'd fly to Fiji. To be more specific, we'd fly first class with Air Pacific. Should I win this for my beautiful bride, how my heart would swell with pride, and many thanks would go to you for helping to make a dream come true.
It sounds like an ad.
It's so cheesy, isn't it? But I knew if I put the sponsors in... and if I gave them what they wanted, I had a good chance of winning. And it worked. We won this, and it was a great honeymoon to Tokariki Island.
It was amazing.
Absolutely brilliant.
You set the standard high from the very beginning, and I haven't expected anything less since.
And so Valentine's Day is a bit of a disappointment for you today. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rullon. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. Craig was the one that convinced us that we had to tell this story. If you've stayed with us right to the very end, thank you so much for indulging us in sharing the story. We hope that it's brought a little bit of light and colour and maybe even some delight to your day. And we hope that our ideas about what makes marriages strong have been a little bit inspiring and helpful for you as well. Thank you so much for listening. We really hope that you have a wonderful, wonderful Valentine's Day. Tomorrow we're back on the Happy Families podcast, sharing our favourite books of the year so far with Book Club. If you want more information about making your family happier, please join us, happyfamilies.com.au, or check us out on all of our socials.